I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. You know, Billy, we have a really interesting show today. There's something that you might not think about.
You're exactly right, Renee. And, this is one of those shows that actually came from one of our viewers, So big thanks to our viewer, and hopefully they're watching today and they'll be able to kind of learn from Gwen Henderson. We've had Gwen on the show in the past. She's an archaeologist with the WKU Kentucky Archaeological Survey. She's going to be talking about a pile of rocks. I know many landowners have seen rocks piled up on their property, and they might have wondered what those were and what was going on. So Gwen's she's done some digging, literally, and she's going to share some knowledge with us about what those pile of rocks look like. Oh, we also have Dr. Matt Springer with us today. Coming up on February 1st is National Serpent Day, right? So that's a big deal. So
Dr. Matt has to talk about snakes.
I know. He loves that. So Matt's going to be giving us some knowledge about what's going on with that. So we're glad to have that. And I'll wrap us up with some upcoming programs that are going to be happening in February that many of you all may be interested in. But thank you all for being with us. You can interact with us via Zoom on the chat pod, and we'll be happy to kind of take any questions you'll have for our presenters there.
Definitely. All right, so let's get started. So Gwen, if you'd like to turn on your camera.
Okie dokie.
Welcome.
Joe, we appreciate you being on.
I do too. I'm really glad that someone asked this question, that you posed it to me so that I could do some focused research and investigation about this very interesting and frustrating topic. I have run across these kinds of things out during doing archaeological surveys and have wondered many things, and the research that I've done hasn't helped much to clear things up, but at least I have an understanding of why I'm so confused.
There we go.
Always good to know why you're confused.
Hey, there you go.
I'm not much better, but anyway. So I'm just telling the audience, if you expect answers at the end of this, you should stop watching now.
No.
I got nothing for you. I got pictures.
All right, Gwen, let us show those pictures to us and let us know if it is just a pile of rocks.
Share that screen. Okay, is that looking good to you all?
Looks good. Excellent. Thanks, man.
Okie dokie. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Gwen Henderson. I'm the education coordinator at the Kentucky Archaeological Survey here at Western Kentucky University. And I'm going to be talking about just a pile of rocks. Well, actually, it's not just a pile. It's many different kinds of things. And the two images you see here are a before and after shot, which you'll see later in the program. A chimney clearing before, an old chimney before clearing, and an old chimney after clearing. And it still doesn't look too much like a chimney, does it? Well, that's part of the ambiguity of piles of rocks. All right, so, well, it's not just a pile of rocks. It can be many different kinds of things, this pile of rocks. It might look like a pile of rocks to us now, but it wasn't a pile of rocks long ago. I think perhaps what all of these landscape features share is the fact that they could be anything given their current state of what we see it when we see it. They are ambiguous, they are ubiquitous, but their ambiguous shapes hide diverse origins and functions. And if you want to think about it in this way, because from a certain perspective, I suppose you could call them sort of mundane. After all, they're just rocks, right? But they're not just rocks. They are the reflection of timeless human landscape modification. Now think about that for just a minute. Timeless human landscape modification. Some of these piles of rocks were made because of sacred religious ceremonies by indigenous people thousands and thousands of years ago. That's a human landscape modification. Some of these things are ruins of former standing structures like fences or houses or walls or what have you. Again, human landscape modification. So in this regard, if you look at these, not as a pile of rocks, but as a physical, tangible aspect of human landscape modification. It links us to humans long ago and not so long ago. And it's sort of a tangible marker of people on the land. So whose land? Well, when we walk across our lands, our fields, our forests, and most of these images that you will see today are taken of rock features in forests. We need to realize that the land is not always the way it looks now. And it's a landscape that really, if you could see it physically, and actually those piles of rocks, those old house sites, those old native burial grounds are those physical manifestations of these landscapes. We're seeing into the past. And if we can try to imagine what the place would have looked like, could have looked like centuries ago, completely cleared off in some cases, or centuries or millennia ago, which when it was more wooded perhaps, or maybe even completely open, depending on how the climate has changed over the millennia. So we've got elements of ancient sacred native landscapes, and we also have elements of modern and not so modern landscapes. I've never been able to pronounce the word, but it means overlapping aspects, overlapping histories. And the touch points are these piles of rock, the elements of long ago land modification. Now, when we think of landscape and the land around our houses and our towns and so forth, if we think about it with a lens of time on it, then we can see that it was a sacred landscape, it's an economic landscape, it's a social landscape, it's a cultural landscape. And we move through this every day. And thinking about this, I mean, that's what these rock piles, preparing this presentation for you guys today, has made me think of. This landscape that we're living in is surrounded by elements of the past. And that's what these objects are. Okay, so how do we figure out how old they are and what they were used for? This is the big challenge. This is the big frustration. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some examples of the different kinds of things that we sort of know what they are and things that we don't know at all. And then I'll try to offer some suggestions on how we might be able to at least perhaps not know exactly what's on our land, and landowners won't know perhaps exactly what things are, but at least have an idea what it's not. Okay, so when we try to figure out how old these features are, we need to consider time, context, change, and their characteristics. So I spoke about time in terms of landscape, but certainly time, the long ago and more recent, coexisting. So I've already covered that. But we also have to consider context when we're trying to figure out what these things are. And what I mean by that is this pile of rocks in the middle of a field, on the edge of a current field, in the forest where, if you looked at documents, you could see had been the edge of an old property? Is it on a ridgetop? Is it in a floodplain? Is it on the side of a steep slope? What's around it? Are there other things like this around it or in the general area? What does it look like? Is it a pile of rocks, or are they haphazardly, or are they actually like layered? Are the rocks all the same size? Are they different kinds of rocks? Are they clean of lichen? Are they not? Really, really looking at them is one way to figure out their identification. Consider that they're not static. If these are objects, if these are features that have been there for a really long time, other people have seen this and been just as flummoxed as you are. And some people have decided, hey, this is a great combination. I can come here and take these rocks for what I want to use. So what you see the way it is now is not the way it was left originally, and perhaps not even the way it was intended to look. This ambiguity provides fertile ground for fantastic and supernatural origins. I cannot tell you how many people have called me up and said that they had found evidence of Welsh Indians. There are no Welsh Indians in Kentucky. Evidence of supernatural beings. No, these are not supernatural. But because we don't know what they are, and they look odd and strange to us, we can fantasize about all kinds of things of what they might be because we don't know what they are. Try to refrain from that. And by considering time, the context, change, and the characteristics of these things, at least we won't be compelled to turn them into some kind of interesting supernatural features. Okay, so I'm going to start with features that were made by indigenous people long ago. Here's an example of a stone mound in Knox County. This thing stands about 3 feet high. The rocks are big, but portable by a regular person. One view of it on the bottom right-hand side, you can see how it's got a pit in the middle. Most stone mounds in Kentucky have been looted in the past, and so this is why they look like that. That's not the way they looked originally by Native peoples, but that's what they look like now. You can see the archaeologist taking notes there. He'll have mapped and measured and examined this particular site in Knox County. You pull my notes up here, is on a ridge. It covers almost all of a conical ridge. Indigenous people, when they built mounds, whether they were of stone or of stone and soil or just soil, many times located their mounds on prominent places, like, for example, this one on a conical ridge top, or in places with wide vistas, wide landscape vistas. Here's another example of stone mounds in Livingston County. They look pretty lame. I'll grant you that. Pretty lame. The stone mound here, the bottom right-hand image, a road went through it. That's the reason why it looks the way it does. The rocks are all piled up on the side. And you might say to me, well, gosh, Gwen, how do you know? Well, we know because 82 of these stone piles are found in this spot directly below a village, a Native American village that's up on a high, well, if we were in the Southwest, it'd be a mesa. It would look like a mesa in Livingston County. The village site excavations indicated that Native peoples lived there around 600 or 700 AD, and stone burial mounds are a characteristic of that particular culture in that particular part of Kentucky. All 82 of the mounds have been looted in some way. So they all have holes in the center of them. Multiple sizes, some are big, some are tiny, but all of them we infer are burial mounds because of the context and because of other research in the area. Okay, let me move on to historic period rock piles. Okay, here is a stone chimney pile before clearing. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I'd see a stone chimney there. Here it is cleared off. Well, between you and me, it doesn't look much better. I mean, to me. This chimney pile, we know is a chimney pile because historic period artifacts were found in the general area when the archaeologists were doing the research, number one. Number two, underneath this stack or pile of rocks is actually a base, an organized base of rocks. Tell that it's a base of rocks, or at least an archaeologist, historic archaeologist who knows what chimney bases look like can tell that for sure. It tends to be squarish at the base. This illustrates how important context is. And also, having done historic documents research, oftentimes old maps will show some of these old house sites, which are in the field. I mean, which are now in the forest, but before were not. And so using a combination of context, historical documents, recovery of historic period artifacts, and other aspects there, like for instance, in the springtime, historic sites might still have plants that are growing in the spring, like bulbs, daffodils and so forth. You come across daffodils in the middle of the forest, there's some kind of historic site there of some sort. Here's another example of a chimney foundation before clearing and after clearing. You can particularly see the sort of edge on it there. These are they look like piles of fieldstone because they are made with locally available rocks that in many ways the folks who are building the house haven't changed the rocks at all. They haven't dressed them, they haven't shaped them or anything. They've just used them to build their stone chimneys. Okay, here is a house site. Yes, I know what you're thinking. How do we know it's a house? Again, documents help. Also, in this part, like in this particular house site in Leslie County, archaeologists who study historic sites in areas like Leslie County in the eastern mountains particularly, they know that houses were built on piers. And those pier stones, while sometimes might be robbed, other times won't be robbed. And so you will find pier stones in an arrangement that indicates the size of a house. If there's a well nearby, it's about context and about artifacts as well. And this is not much of a pile either, but these are, in comparison to walking through the rest of the woods, this is more rocks than you would expect to find. Now move on to roads. Okay, here's a line of rocks. If you didn't know there was a road there, you'd say, what is this line of rocks doing here? But because you're on Fort Hill in Franklin County, and Fort Hill is overlooking the city of Frankfort, and because you know there was a Civil War fort there, and that Fort Hill has all kinds of roads on it, you would know then that this line of rocks is not just a line of rocks sitting around, minding their own business, if you will. But if you look around your context, you can see that the evidence of that road is still subtly there on the landscape. How about this? Here's a retaining wall. If you came across it, you're thinking, what the heck? Until you look up and over it, and you can see that Civil War road right there. My colleague, Jay Stopman, who did the research here at Fort Hill, pointed out this road culvert. This is not some kind of significant keyhole that supernatural beings are targeting for some sort of ritual. This is a hole left in the retaining wall for an intermittent stream to drain through and away from the road. Logging road clearings like this one in Knox County are ubiquitous and ambiguous all over the state, particularly in rocky areas. The folks who are building the roads in more modern times, it would be with bulldozers and so forth. In earlier times, it would have been with horses and drawing machinery to pull the rocks away. They'll pile them up, in a seemingly unorganized way. But as you look through the woods and see the evidence of the road there, this pile of rocks is not difficult to interpret because that road is there. Now, you might say to me, well, Gwen, in time, once the trees become even larger and the road becomes even less able to be visible, what will people think then? Well, they're going to be just as confused as you are and as I am about other kinds of rock features where the elements of the context have been removed or have been are no longer visible. Here's a classic stone fence. I don't think anybody in Kentucky anywhere would wonder what this pile of rocks is. You can see how the rocks are laid. They've been selected for a certain size. They're organized. Okay, no question, no ambiguity. No one even would call this one just a pile of rocks. But what about what's on the right here? This is a stone fence. There's a stone fence in the other picture too, on the left. If you didn't know that this was the edge of an old property boundary, I mean, this stone fence once looked like the stone fence in my former picture. And as time goes on, it's going to become less and less visible. And should people wish to rob stones, there may end up, and I'm sure on the landscape there are, former locations of stone fences that people have robbed. And what you have are intermittent long lines or short lines of rocks, the barest of evidence of old property boundaries and old fence lines. Now here's a rock-lined well, and you might think to yourself, well, gee, that's hardly a pile of rocks, and I'm sure I would not miss that if I was walking through the woods, because you can see that there's a well there. It's a hole in the ground. Yes, unless that hole in the ground is filled up completely. And this particular rock-lined well really confused and concerned Jay, because there is no evidence of a house around, or at least not in the area where he was surveying. Maybe the house wasn't built on piers. Maybe there was some other kind of historic small industry that was going on, and there's just no evidence of that now because it was all above ground, was never using stone to be involved in any of the structures or anything like that. Out in the middle of the forest finds this well, a pile of rocks, but it's actually a well. Now here's something that's really wacky. I'm starting out with something that's I mean, come on, you would never wonder what this was. It's got a grate across it. You got a picture of it. This is Mammoth Cave in the 1930s. It's a campground, and that's what one of the campfire fake places looked like. Okay, this pile of rocks, no question, no ambiguity. It's a fireplace for a campground. But what if you didn't know there was a campground there? And what if you didn't have any pictures that indicated what it looked like? This example of one of the campfire grates is what you see here on the left. There's no grate. It's like this V-shaped rocks. When Jay first showed this to me, I'm like, how can that be a campfire fireplace? Aren't campfire fireplaces circular? He said, not always. And then he showed me this picture from the 1930s. It was a formal camp. It's no longer a campground there at Mammoth Cave. But because they knew it was a campground, they know what this thing is. There are other elements on the landscape. If native peoples still lived here and were not removed during the early 1800s, they might be able to explain to us what some of these indigenous, quote unquote, piles of rocks are. We don't have anything written down from them, and we don't have them here to tell us. So that's why some of the ambiguity of ancient piles of rocks are going to remain ambiguous. In this case, we know it was a campground. We have a picture of what it looked like, and this is what it looks like now as a ruin. There are other kinds of rocks that aren't piles at all, but just one rock sticking straight up. If I had come across this, I don't know if I would have recognized it. But this is a cemetery, and the gravestone marker is in the bottom center of this photo. There's a stone fence in the background, in the far background in this picture. And this is in Jefferson County, an old grave site in a floodplain in Jefferson County. And here are some classics. These are the ones that really keep you up at night. Jay has no idea what this thing is. Is it a field clearing? Is it the foundation of something? How old is it? Well, let's pull our powers of observation to look at this thing. Okay, so we've got portable rocks. We've got lichen on them. They are arranged in some kind of order. We've got layers here. It looks like they're trying to make some kind of flatness on that right side of it. It's around a tree, is it? I don't know. We can't tell from this photograph. Is it around a tree or the tree grow through it? Think about it now. Remember, time goes on, things change, trees can grow in the middle of these things. There's no reason why they can't. If that tree in the background is in this rock pile, this rock pile then would predate it. And that might indicate how old it is by understanding how fast the tree grows. Here's another one, same area. And here's a map. Okay, so from this map, what can we tell? Okay, well, we know that there's a stone outcrop there and the slope is going down towards the bottom of the slide. And there are these stacked stones and various piles of rock on this ridge. No artifacts. Would there have been a field here? Well, there are certain ways fields are cleared for agriculture. You don't throw them too far away because everybody's just trying to get the rocks out of the way. They're usually on the downslope side, so that's is suggested here. They're on the downslope side, but there's no artifacts, there's no house nearby. And some of these look like this one, stacked. Others look like that. Nothing shows up on documents, like in a map or anything like that. So the historic archaeologists are in the same position as archaeologists who study ancient native peoples. What the heck is it? He's suggested that perhaps it's a field clearing, but he doesn't feel comfortable with that. And he sure as heck doesn't know what this is. He thinks it's a field clearing, but it looks way too organized to be a field clearing. Unless somebody who lived nearby started playing around with the rocks and made that. I'm thinking of kids' sports come to mind. Okay, here's a classic. We've seen this picture before, the house site in Leslie County. That's a house site. This site in Menifee County, there's no artifacts. It's near a road. Is it a road clearing? Why would it be? There's no well around. They're not really sure. They really are not sure. No maps. The rocks seem to be in a concentration, but what are they? No way to know. So what I want to close with for this is just to encourage you not to give up on your rock piles. I would like you to think about them as something that's more than just a pile of rocks. They can be many different things, as you can see. Things that we don't know what they are, things that we can come pretty close to figuring out what they are, some that we're kind of not exactly sure. So where this leaves you and me as an archaeologist and you as a landowner is not particularly in a good place. You know, I'm frustrated. I'd like to know what all of these things are, but we're going to have to live with a bit of ambiguity. So what you can do if you would like to get more information, because some archaeologists, study this kind of stuff, and there are certain elements that would be perhaps difficult for landowners to pull all the information together, but with the proper guidance from an archaeologist, might be able to figure out exactly what it's not, at least. So take a look at it, really look at it. How big is it? How many rocks are there? How big are they? Can one person move them, or is it like way too big for one person to move? Thinking about the amount of labor that it takes to make this thing. Is there any order to the rocks? That kind of thing. Are they local? Are they local rocks? Or are they rocks from some other place? Really take a look at where the pile is. Is it on a ridge? Is it in the floodplain? Is it on the edge of a ridge? What's around it? Are there other things like that? Is it near a road? Is it near a current house site? If you're really interested, going to take a look at old maps in the county courthouse to see if there was at one time a land boundary that went through there. And armed with that information, call an archaeologist and say, look, I've done this, this, and this, and I still don't know what this thing is. And I want to know if it's important, I want to preserve it. And if it's not important, I want to get it out of the way so I can do what I need to do on my landscape in my time. I respectfully request that you not dig into it, because if it is a Native American stone burial mound, then you've desecrated a grave. And aside from that being ethically inappropriate, it's honestly against the law. And so that's the best I can leave with you. I realize it's kind of frustrating, but by looking and thinking about these places as features of long ago people and landscapes and use of a land that is ours but was theirs once, it connects us to them, and it makes these piles of rock not just piles of rock, but I don't know, in their ambiguity, they're kind of cool. And because we're talking about snakes or serpents, I thought I would leave you with a little bit of information about a pile of rocks that is not a pile of rocks at all, but is a stone serpent. January 25th actually is the Day of Serpents in Lithuania, a symbolic awakening for the folks in Lithuania. And as I may have the wrong date there, February 1, sorry, is National Serpent Day. What you can see here on the bottom is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. And here is the Stone Serpent Mound in Kentucky. It's just a pile of rocks. What you see is it's looking east. It is 627 feet long. There are no artifacts there. Sometimes it's stacked up almost 3 feet, and sometimes it's only less than half a foot. It follows the contours of the landscape, up and down, up and down. You can see a road has impacted its head. There's a little stone mound way below it, and this is overlooking the Big Sandy. Stone Serpent Mound. It's not just a pile of rocks. So, thank you, everyone.
Gwen, you always bring such interesting stuff to us. I love it. And we did have a couple of questions for you. One person wanted to know, is the chimney where the Thomas and Jefferson sister lived in Livingston County? The chimney that you showed.
Okay, hang on. Let me share the screen again. The site in Livingston County, none of the chimneys none of the chimneys piles in my presentation are linked to them.
Okay. And then someone wanted to know, how do they go about getting a site from or a visit from the Kentucky Archaeological to look at some rock structures that they might have on their property?
Good question. What you can do is go to our website, Kentucky Archaeological Survey. If you just Google that, you'll find our website, and you can contact us there, or you can contact me, gwen.henderson@wku.edu. And what helps for us, if somebody's interested, as you can see, if you could take photographs and practice, I guess, practice by measuring it yourself and taking a look at what the rocks look like, and maybe doing a little historic research to see if it's on a property boundary or something like that, so that you're armed with some information that would help us parse out the possibilities.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, very cool. Gwen, as always, it's good stuff. It really is. And while we may not have all the answers, you did give us a lot of possibilities, right, to kind of explore, and just being able to kind of narrow it down a little bit, I think, is tremendously helpful.
Good.
Instead of like supernatural stuff happening, right?
I think people will see rocks differently now.
Well, that's my hope, because certainly in preparing this, I look at these rocks different now. I really do. It's really quite remarkable to see them as places of importance to other people long ago than just a pile of rocks.
Well, thank you, Gwen. We appreciate you being on.
Yeah, and be on the lookout for additional requests, because you got the
yes. Thanks.
All right. So, that snakes thing was really cool. And, that's been our next topic. So she had a really good tie-in.
I know. Dr. Springer's here to tell us a little bit more about some snakes and serpents. And Matt, welcome.
As always, fun to be here. And for whatever reason, I tend to come and talk about snakes more than I think anything else. So I guess it's fitting that I'm here to talk a little bit about National Serpent Day. And, do you want me to get right into it?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. So we're coming up. It's unfortunately January seems to have flown by, and time goes faster as you get older, I guess. But February 1st is is basically National Serpent Day worldwide, and many people are probably questioning, why do we have a day that is there to think about snakes? Well, despite your personal viewpoint, snakes have been kind of this symbol in many cultures, and in many ways it's not always a negative symbol, right? But they do have some negative connotations in some cultures, but they have been a symbol of medicine, good, evil, fertility, and it has some form of belonging in almost every culture because of the diversity of the locations that we have in snakes worldwide. In many ways, genetically, a lot of our species, including ourselves, are kind of hardwired to have a reaction to anything that somewhat looks like a snake. You can even test this out by throwing a rope underneath somebody unknowingly, and they'll tend to jump back. And that's kind of a hardwiring of us to try to get away from a potentially dangerous animal. Though the message I have here today is that the majority of the snakes that we encounter, especially in Kentucky, are not that, and we don't have those worries. The way these animals are viewed, as I mentioned, can be good or evil, but a lot of times there was at least a knowing that the venom that some of these species had was outside of being dangerous to get to the what those animals needed in order to say catch their prey or subdue their prey. It's been used in various ways within cultures, including as painkillers and more modern as we understand chemistry and how the properties that these venoms have. We were applying to things like hypertension, treatments for strokes, heart disease, and even cancer have been explored. So there's a lot of value potentially in even the most dangerous part of having snakes around. And just a little evolutionary note, in 2015, we found the oldest fossil for a snake, which is believed to be 113 million years old, and it was found as a four-legged snake. So it had all the correct things except additional legs. And that was found in Brazil. And so this is thought to be one of the earliest snakes within that order of species, but is one that they have been around for a long time, and that's why they've been able to build that history with many of our human cultures. On top of that, there's a fairly diverse group of species. There's approximately 3,000 species of snakes worldwide, with only 1 in 8 being venomous, and they are all shapes, sizes, colors, right, including things like worm snakes and so on, as well as this very pretty red-sided garter snake, which is similar and related to our garter snake that we have here in Kentucky, just a little bit flashier. This is the California red-sided garter. And with that diversity of this number of species, we have a lot of snakes that will inhabit pretty much every type of habitat that we have globally, minus the Arctic and Antarctic. That is one place we are lacking, but we have things like sea snakes and snakes that specialize in grasslands, that survive in deserts, that are completely aquatic, semi-aquatic. They are all over the board, including arboreal, terrestrial, and fossorial, which means in the trees, on the ground, and under the ground. So we cover the entire gambit here. And with all these species, they are generally most diverse in tropical environments, right? And we're going to talk about why that makes sense here in a second. But the 3 areas that are going to carry the most diversity are places like Mexico, Brazil, and India. They are the 3 that have well over 300 species of snakes. And, as you can see, the tropics is where that's located. We are here in the United States are in the 200 to 299. And we have been still finding, as with the case with many wildlife species and insects, new species even recently, which included the world's smallest snake, the Barbados red snake, which is about 4 inches long as an adult, and it's pictured there. But the longest snake, which is always the question to get, right? What's the smallest snake? What's the largest snake? Well, the longest snake is the reticulated python, which have been seen upwards of 33 feet. And those that care about the venomous side, The largest venomous snake is the king cobra, which is upwards of 18 feet. Now, they may be the longest, they are not the heaviest. The heaviest snake comes in at almost 500 pounds, and that is the green anaconda, which makes sense that it is a aquatic snake, right? So anacondas are aquatic snakes, because supporting 500 pounds of snake on the land would be rather difficult. However, just a picture of that's one of the pythons in the Everglades, and that snake that's pictured there, you can't even see the head. That's only a 17-foot long snake. So you can imagine almost doubling that and what that equates to, and trying to move across the ground, and with potentially all that weight. The thread snakes are a group of very small snakes, as you can see, but the Barbados one, I believe, was just found in 2018. So that's one of our newer snake species that also was this small. And why do we care? Why do we have a National Serpent Day on top of the cultural ramifications? Well, these animals have an important role in many of our ecosystems. And getting back to why we see most of them in the tropics, that number of species and diversity. Well, tropics, the energy that's there, the temperature, the consistency, allows for a lot of diversification of species. But also, when you're a cold-blooded group of organisms that really rely on external energy to keep your metabolism going, you're going to have a lot easier time surviving where it's constantly warm. Though we have snakes that do live in temperate forests and boreal forests somewhat, they are very few and far between. So you have a lot less of them, and therefore a lot less ability to diversify into many species. But for the most part, snakes are predators. They're carnivores. And as Dr. Price would say, the easiest thing to fit inside a snake is another snake. So there's cannibalism that goes on, and quite a few species in Kentucky do that. But many of these guys are rather abundant within the systems that they live in. And because they're all carnivores, they act as a major control mechanism for a lot of the species that are actually pet species for us, things like rodents. With that in mind, so that prey control has a lot of benefits in society. On top of, it's been shown that rattlesnakes in areas with Lyme disease act as a mechanism to help limit the source of Lyme, right? So Lyme disease has a cycle where the tick's attached to rodents, and then a secondary cycle where the tick attaches to that rodent and then goes and gets that blood meal and goes to a human. So if you limit the number of rodents within the system, you actually lower the transmission of Lyme disease. So the only way that happens is major control mechanism within those woods are snakes, and in particular rattlesnakes. So rattlesnakes have been linked to a lower level of Lyme disease where they're present. So they have some benefits in wildlife health component inside, right? Human health, as well as pest management. They have the ability to get to extreme populations, and especially, like I mentioned, that picture of the python in the Everglades. We have a major problem in some areas with invasive species. Florida, it's got to the point where they're so good at predation that they're actually causing drastic declines of many of our native mammal species, the marsh rabbit, and even there's pictures of those pythons killing alligators. So they are really good at what they do, and they can get to larger numbers of populations to have a major impact on many other species, whether they are invasive or not. So that's kind of the benefit, and not such a good benefit if they don't belong there, side of snakes and serpents. Now, this is the nightmare component that everyone, I get phone calls about, and this is an actual picture I submitted from someone to ID a snake. And taking National Serpent Day down to what you need to know in Kentucky. So if you have this snake sitting there, you're probably wondering, is this something that can hurt me? Well, first and foremost, no, it is not. That is just a rat snake that is unfortunately climbing in places it shouldn't be and popping out and scaring you, or at least startling. But general things that we want to talk about living with snakes in Kentucky, because they are that important role in the ecosystem, is first and foremost, you want to identify the snake you're dealing with. And if you can't identify it, leave it alone. Move away from it. Of the 34 species of snake we have in Kentucky, 4 are potentially venomous and could cause you a problem. Realistically, it's 3. So the odds are you are not looking at a venomous snake. But if you want to limit those chances, especially around the places you live, reduce those shrubby areas around your house, your garden, keep your grass mowed short. Anything that could attract a rodent, you want to get rid of, or anything that could protect the snake from aerial predators, because many of their predators are actually things like hawks or owls. So anything that would protect them from that, you want to make sure that that's limited in areas that you do not want to see a snake around. And though we just heard about not messing with rock piles, you don't want any rock piles around where you don't want snakes, because that is a definite attractor as a cover source and food source, along with things like piles of metal or wood piles. All those are good for snakes, not so good if you don't want to see it. So have a snake around, identify it, can't identify it, leave it alone, or use extreme caution with moving it. And in order to help you identify it, we had this wonderful resource that was put together by some of my colleagues here in the department, including one of the hosts of the show, which is our Kentucky Snake Identification Site. And that walks you through all the snakes that we have in Kentucky and ways that you can identify what you're looking at. Key features that you're going to need to pay attention to if you have a snake in front of you: body shape, okay? Other things, head shape. Most people say triangle head is a venomous snake, which is true with pit vipers, but we have several snakes that will actually flatten their head out to make it look like a venomous snake. So you want to use multiple characteristics to help make that ID. And one of those is one of the more common species that you'll run into, which is your water snake, or group of species that you run into. Water snakes will commonly flatten their head out to project as a threat to anything they view as a threat. One of the best ones, though, that we have that we can use in Kentucky, that doesn't necessarily hold true in other areas, but does hold true in Kentucky, which is that our non-venomous species, their pupils, which if you're close enough to look at a pupil, you're probably too close, are round, whereas our pit vipers, our 4 venomous species, all have that cat eye slit pupil, so it's vertical. They also have, and this is where you're too close, these pits, which help them hunt and find prey and understand what's going on around them. Now, one of the things I commonly get is I found a snake skin shed in my garage or in my attic. Is this a venomous snake, or is this a copperhead? And one of the things that we can use in Kentucky is this use of the post the vent scale configuration. So this is behind where they where they poop, the vent. So it's the tail. You look at, there's a big scale, and then there will be either a continuation of single scale, so there'll be big vent, a double scale set, and then after that you have either single row of scales from that vent to the end of the tail, or a double row. The non-venomous species are going to have double rows all the way to the end of their tail, whereas the venomous species will only have that single set of double row, and then it'll be single row of scales all the way to the end. So if you find a snake skin and the tail is in good shape, you can actually look at that end of the tail and determine if it's a venomous species or a non-venomous species. That is the best that we can do, which for most people is enough to help them get some comfort. Finally, tail characteristics of living ones that are still attached to their skin is, with venomous species, we have 2 that you should pay attention to. Rattlesnake, that end tail, rattle on that tail is a kind of a giveaway. Whereas our copperheads, especially our juvenile copperheads, only our juvenile copperheads will have an actual yellow tip on their tail that they use to attract prey when they're young. But it is a dead giveaway that, there's no other snake that we have with a yellow tail at the end. So that is a no-touch getaway from indication. Wrap this up. I know we're kind of running close in time here. Remember that we have lots of benefits from these animals. They're a vital component of our ecosystems. I mentioned kind of that public health side of things with tick disease and tick control, but these guys are really out there in numerous components of the food chain in terms of top-down regulation of many of the animals that we do not want more of, that can cause a lot of problems for the ecosystem. So if you remove them, you're potentially causing a major impact in the system. So we want to try to keep them around whenever possible. Make sure you ID that snake if you see one so that you're safe. remember that we have this wonderful resource of the snake identification site to use. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me. I get lots of snake emails on a regular basis, probably about 8 to 10 a day starting in April when these guys come out of hibernation. So I'm used to that, and I will walk you through how to identify the picture. As you see here with this one, where we have this Hershey kiss banding pattern, where that dark band is comes up and narrows at the top and is wide at the bottom. That's what I would call Hershey kiss. Being from Pennsylvania, that's a very important thing to me. That's a giveaway for a copperhead in the state of Kentucky, where many snakes are banded. None of them are going to have that Hershey kiss look to them. So that is a pretty good giveaway. And there's hints like that all over that website. With that, I will stop sharing and be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Matt. We greatly appreciate that. And, I'm not a big fan of those four-legged snakes you were talking about. I'm glad they're extinct.
We have something similar where we have like glass lizards that are kind of like the in-between that have legs that they don't really use anymore because they don't really exist. They're just appendages that are sitting there. So, yeah.
Cool stuff, as always, fine.
Well, thank you very much. Gave us a new outlook on snakes as well.
Yes. And everybody celebrate National Serpent Day on February 1st, though.
Yeah, there you go.
Very good.
All right. So, Billy, we have some events that are coming up.
Yeah, I wanted to share a few upcoming programs with folks real quick before we wrap up today's program. And we'll go ahead and get those started. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yep.
All righty. So got some programs coming up. Some of these are posted on our website. You can see there. So check that out. But we'll go over those. First, coming up on February 4th, that's not too far from now, just a couple of Saturdays away, is Kentucky Maple Day. This is your one and only chance to get out and get some pure Kentucky maple syrup across Kentucky. There are 19 locations that are hosting and opening up their farms across the state. And 3 of those are actually associated with our county extension offices or our 4-H camp. So they're going to be doing some educational programs as well. So we really encourage you to get your family out. It's a great winter agritourism event. You get out and see how this maple syrup is produced, and you get a chance to purchase some and to sample some, and it's really a good time. So please get out there and do it. You can get out on our website. Just type in for the Maple Day 2023 Kentucky Maple Day. It should bring you right to it, but I have it posted here as well. And you can find each individual location. You can find the hours for each of these operations, because the hours do differ. So make sure that you check those out before you go out, so you know kind of what to expect. So please don't miss Kentucky Maple Day coming up on February 4th. All right, next thing I wanted to introduce was the Kentucky Forest Health Conference. Dr. Crocker mentioned this a while back, but I wanted to give another plug for it. It is coming up on February 8th, and that's going to be from 9 to 4. It's taking place at Kroger Stadium here on UK's campus. There is a large meeting room within the stadium, and that's where it's going to be taking place. There is a $35 registration for that program, and they're going to be covering a lot of different forest health related topics. Dr. Crocker has worked really closely with Kentucky Division of Forestry and others to put together an amazing conference, as always. So it's a great chance to learn about some of these things that are maybe up and coming, or some new information on some of these that we've been dealing with for a while, including spotted lanternfly, butternut canker, biological control of hemlock woolly adelgid, and much more. So please don't miss that. If you do have any questions about that, please reach out directly to Dr. Crocker. I will note that there are some CEUs, or continuing education units or credits for some programs. And if you have those needs, Dr. Crocker could probably address those as well. So if you're interested in the Kentucky Forest Health Conference, please check that out. That is February 8th. That is in person this year. In the past, we have had that go via Zoom, but it is going to be in person. All right, next one I want to talk about are a couple of controlled burn workshops. And we had Jacob Stewart, who oversees the private lands biologist here in Kentucky. And one of the things that the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources works really closely with, the Kentucky Sky and Burn Council, are these controlled burn workshops. So they've got a couple coming up. The first one's going to be on February 11th, and that's at the Greene County Extension Office. These are basically all-day events, so make sure that you plan accordingly. There is a contact if you want to register for that. You can reach out to Cody on that one. And then coming up on February 18th, we're going to be at the Mercer County Extension Office. Again, that's a full day conference, or meeting, and Kirsten Bowling is your contact for that. So reach out to them if you're interested in registering for either one of those. Do note that there is a $75 registration fee for those. It does include lunch and a lot of training materials as well. But if there is a need and you're from one of those Greene or Mercer County areas, there are some local scholarships available to help offset those costs. So check into that. You can check in with either Cody or Kirsten and find out more information about that. But these workshops are a great opportunity for woodland owners or others who are interested in learning more about how to do control burn on their own property. You're going to learn some of the terminology that's important to this, how these fires are implemented, how fire behaves, and how to go about the planning process, all of which are really important to make sure that your control burn achieves the goals that you're trying to get. So great opportunity. Don't miss this one if you're interested in learning more about prescribed fire and controlled burning. If you want to learn more about both of those subjects, you can explore the website www.kyfire.org, and you'll learn all that you want about prescribed fire, controlled burn, and how it can be applied here in Kentucky. So check those out. The final things I wanted to mention, every week we're here on Wednesdays to provide From the Woods Today with a variety of topics. We're going to start off February talking about forest health. It coincides with some of the work Dr. Crocker's doing on the Forest Health Conference. And then on the 8th of February, we're going to be talking about the impact of climate on bourbon and the aging of wood. So if you're interested in kind of that whole dynamic of the White Oak Initiative and bourbon and all of this, this is one you do not want to miss. This will be a really good one. And I think a lot of people enjoy this one. And then we've got one of our brand new faculty members here at the UK Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, Dr. DJ McNeil, and he's going to be talking about what is a bird. And that may seem simple at first, but there's a bit more to it. So make sure you check that out. I had a chance to visit with Dr. McNeil, and he's got some great content and knowledge about birds, and it's going to be really good. And then we'll wrap up the February shows talking about the spring fire season. Michael Fraley, who's been on before from the Kentucky Division of Forestry, will be kind of leading us into that. So make sure you join us each week on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock on From the Woods Today.
Definitely. That's just something that, we always want to have you on with us. We learn so much, and I know you have to too, again. But if you have anything, today's show was based on somebody's comment. So if you have a question, concern, send us an email and let us know, and you never know when we'll do a show on it.
That's right. All right, everybody. Thanks for being with us. And as always, please, if you know others who could enjoy and appreciate this information, please let them know about From the Woods Today.
Yep. Go to fromthewoodstoday.com if you need to see any of our previous shows. Until then, we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.